Under the Wave off Kanagawa, commonly known as the Great Wave, is a work created by Katsushika Hokusai in circa 1830 to 1832. It was created as part of a collection of woodblock prints called the 36 Views of Mount Fuji. It is an incredibly familiar image to the rest of the world that spread rapidly across the globe due to the easy reproduction of the prints. Artists all over have also created many different alterations of this iconic image, morphing the original intentions that Hokusai had had. This has changed how viewers interpret both the original work and the variety of similar images. Scholars are continually exploring the many different versions and reprints to answer the question of why this particular work of art has commanded the world's attention. Arguably, the Great Wave can be considered Japan's first global brand. It has been widely adapted for advertising, merchandise, beauty products, stationery, books, even food and wine. More and more iterations and reiterations are still being widely produced today. This ongoing process of globalization of the Great Wave and its instant recognizability is an incredibly unique phenomenon not typically found with other works of art. This analysis, based on Marxist methodology, will expand on the socioeconomic significance of the Great Wave while evaluating its many iterations and provide evidence of this work's immense success across the globe. When looking at this image in Figure 1, you note foremost the style, color, and dramatic lines that Hokusai selected. The image appears to capture the strong sense of Mount Fuji with the placement of images within the composition. The stark contrast of color in the image seemed to emphasize the turbulence of the scene. The curves of the boats imply a strong sense of movement through the waves, implying danger to the men depicted in them. Mount Fuji in the background displays a sense of calm and steadiness, contrasting to the foreground. The soft fade of the background has a sense of peace, but as it transitions to a darker color, it seems more foreboding to the viewer. Hokusai plays with the exaggeration of scale and the relationships of the images. His choice of scale and positioning leads the viewer's attention to compete between the giant wave and the image of Mount Fuji in the distance. It is an image that is asymmetrical, yet perfectly balanced. Hokusai's Great Wave may be perfectly balanced. However, the effect of the viewer changes based on a Western reading or a Japanese reading. When a Japanese viewer looks at the image, they typically see a large wind-driven wave. But when Euro-American viewers look at it, they typically identify it as a tsunami. From a Western perspective, reading from left to right, the wave simply rolls along the image following the movement of the eyes. For the Japanese viewer, the eye movement is from right to left, the traditional way Japanese text is read. This would make it seem more ominous, meaning Hokusai intended the wave to tumble into the viewer's face. These unusual characteristics are a combination of Western and traditional Japanese styles. This is likely due to Hokusai wanting to bring the old and new together. Because the Great Wave originated as an inexpensive woodblock for making prints, it is estimated that somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 impressions were made during Hokusai's lifetime. The collection that the Great Wave is a part of was originally published by Nishimuraya Yohachi when the collection of the 36 Views of Mount Fuji was initially announced in 1831 as an advertisement at the end of the novel Shohon Chitate, Volume 12 by Ryute Tanehiko. The publisher emphasized that they would be single-sheet prints in blues that serve those who want landscapes and display the changing shape of Mount Fuji from different locations in Japan. Even though it was named the 36 Views, Nishimuraya emphasized how since the blocks were cut one after the other, they could make well over 100 variations of Hokusai's landscapes, as well as there being 10 additional prints designed. These announcements were repeated until 1834. These repeated announcements of the series of prints was a tactic by publishers at the time to ensure that fanatical print lovers would try to buy all the different prints of various locations. So even as early as its initial creation, money was a driving factor in the creation and the reception of the Great Wave. This is especially notable in the lack of documentation about the Fuji series from Hokusai himself. It is noted that the additional 10 views, showing a western view and the backside of Mount Fuji, were most likely added by the publisher to take advantage of the enormous popularity the series was already experiencing. The blue pigment used in the printing of the image also plays a big role in the reception outside of Japan. The Berlin or Prussian blue was a new imported mineral pigment used in Japanese printing that did not fade over time, unlike the traditionally used blue floral extract. This pigment was both rare and expensive. This lasting pigment meant that when Japan opened to the West and art became a trade, those that found or purchased prints of Hokusais would have prints that maintained their brilliant color. This new series promised a welcoming change to the conventional views and styles, since very few artists before Hokusai incorporated different angles of vision and atmospheric changes in the appearance of the mountain. Ukiyo-e has a long history in Japan, but the turning point was the transition to landscapes and scenes of everyday life in the 1800s. The ability to produce on a large scale with woodblock printing was revolutionary. This is the primary factor that drove the popularity, and due to the relatively cheap production of the woodblock prints, the desire to collect them spread across all economic classes. As a result, artists had the ability to reproduce artworks on a large scale, making them available to the general public, not just wealthy patrons. This was revolutionary during the reign of the Tokugawa shogunate. Collecting artworks and prints went from being something enjoyed by only the courtiers, samurai, and the elite to being a widely accessible trend. This fueled the development of new forms of culture and entertainment among the commoners. It allowed for a redistribution of wealth from the elite, undermining the established systems and contributing to growth and commercialization of the economy. When Japan reopened to the rest of the world after a long period of being closed off and secluded, the images created from ukiyo-e were picked up and popularized by many Western European artists and collectors, surging across the art markets. This also led to Japanese art becoming a serious area of study for many Western scholars and critics by the 1870s, with many of Hokusai's works becoming more popular than any other print and a growing number of impressive collections. These events sparked a new renaissance in Europe, driving the creation of a new movement of art, Japanese Mei, along with heavy influences in post-impressionism. This massive surge in popularity throughout Europe and the United States of ukiyo-e and Hokusai's work specifically drove the Great Wave to new heights. The growing interest of the Western world in Japan and the new imports of pigments and artistic styles allowed Hokusai to experiment to the fullest on his works. Due to this, the Great Wave became a symbolic image of a change happening in Japanese society, bringing in more foreign influence. Hokusai found balance in the combination of styles, incorporating the Western influence and bias, yet leaving it a very Japanese-styled work at the same time. Because of the perspective of the work, the structure of society and commercialism, and the unique nature of Hokusai himself, the work takes on a dual role, paying homage to his obsession with the sacred mountain of Japan and being symbolic of the strength and stability of Japan as a country. The intention of Hokusai was to incorporate many different readings into the Great Wave, building onto an iconic story of Japan and the growing foreign influence. His use of the wave motif also lent itself to readily communicating a multiplicity of messages that went far beyond those that Hokusai had originally intended. This led to an ever-evolving message, morphed and changed by many different artists over the next 2 centuries. This appropriation of Japanese aesthetic led to a lasting fascination with the image of the Great Wave and thousands upon thousands of new uses of the image. It became an exotic commodification that became inextricably tied to marketing, merchandise, and street art, whether it be for commercialism, literature, or music. Hokusai's image began to lose its explicit connection to Japan. Museums became the first leading purveyors of merchandise depicting the Great Wave. It gave the intrinsic spectacularity of the wave agency to transform this commonplace merchandise into a communication of authority for the museum. This masterpiece branding does make good commercial sense because of it giving mundane, mass-produced goods a cachet to distinguish them from products available on the streets. However, through constant replication, it simultaneously markets both sameness and the differences in created parodies and iterations. This also allows for other commercial businesses to capitalize on the aura of the merchandise by paying a licensing fee to make money through mass marketing and desired image. Most pastiches and parodies of this image do not point explicitly back to Hokusai or his artwork as well. Professional artists and graphic designers know the Great Wave through studies, but that is not necessarily something that the general public may connect with. Many artists that use this motif may not even expect the public to make this connection to Hokusai. Even with consumer goods, the designer or manufacturer may not even make the connection themselves. This act of consumerism is a process of self-construction through differentiations in which marketing capitalizes on the recognition of images that consumers often buy as concern for their own identity, according to economic sociologists Thorstein Veblen and Pierre Bourdieu. One of the earlier iterations of the image by a Westerner is the cover of M. Claude Debussy's Le Mur, in which the composer chose to use part of the image of the Great Wave for his music score. It was used as a cover for his first edition, published in 1905 to 1906 by A. Durand Fils. This is an early example of the work being adapted for commercial use. Debussy had a very visual imagination, surrounded himself with a multitude of artworks, many of which came from Japan. His use of a cropped image of the Great Wave lends itself to the symbolism that the music itself holds. Debussy, like many French artists, developed a fascination with the work after many Japanese works made their way to France. His choice of the image both serves as a homage to Hokusai and as a display of the music of Le Mur itself. And yet it can also serve as a selling point for the music score, playing on the growing popularity of Japanese art and the Japanese art movement in France during the mid to late 19th century. The choice to crop out half of the image removes any notion of this image being a depiction of Japan, essentially removing the cultural elements of the work. This cropping leaves only the wave itself and removes the sense of danger and turbulence. It also changes the reading. The viewer loses the context and symbolism of the foreign influence of Japan. It no longer can be seen as a Japanese work, but simply just as an image of a wave. This removal of cultural elements leaves room for easier replication and adaptations of the Great Wave. It makes the image feel more commercialized. However, this still works with Hokusai's original intentions for the image. He wanted to have a shifting meaning, which Debussy's cover still does. It removes the cultural elements, but still leaves the same sense. It leaves it up to the viewer to interpret and find the connection to his music and the original image. In Figure 3 from 1960, Yamashiro Ryuichi created a poster for the Second International Prints Biennial held at Tokyo Museum of Modern Art in Japan. This was an especially unique iteration of the Great Wave during the time of its creation. Adaptations of Hokusai's work were very rare due to most designers of the time self-consciously rejecting the idea of ukiyo-e as fashionable art. Artists of the time also claimed that ukiyo-e compromised the role of Japanese art because of its role in constructing stereotypes of Japan after the spread of the prints through Europe and the United States. The aim of Yamashiro and other artists in his field was to aim for greater industry and international recognition for commercial designers. In his image, he has created a geometric form in tones of blue, green, and lavender that frames the sweeping motion of the more naturalistic wave. This leads to a streamlined and abstract form that is intended to suppress any overt historicized reading of the familiar image of the Great Wave. Yamashiro aimed for an interpretation driven by international modernism, which had become the universal standard of design at the time. This both agrees with and conflicts Hokusai's original meanings for the Great Wave. It leaves room for an interpretation of different readings, but it removes the direct intentions of paying homage to the strength of Japan as a country and Mount Fuji. The artist's intention was to broaden the meaning and focus on an international audience, removing the elements of Hokusai himself, yet still paying homage to the original work. This next image is The Great Ava off Kanagawa by artist Brian Chan. It is a verbal pun play on the Great Wave. It is a digital print in which the artist was inspired by the apocalyptic anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion in 2013. Brian Chan grew up in San Francisco, California, and claims that he, quote, just grew up knowing about the wave, end quote, meaning that it was already a prevalent image when he was a child. Chan says that he appreciates the Great Wave because of its combination of chaos and order due to the widespread success of the anime Evangelion. This digitally drawn parody was featured on the cover of Ian Condry's novel, The Soul of Anime, in 2013. With the design of Chan's work, we see an expanded flow of Hokusai's wave. This flow represents a flow around the world. The American scholar Henry Jenkins calls this a media convergence in which the old and new collide in media. It is the epitome of Marxism in art. It is a representation of the grassroots of popular design meets corporate media, intersecting both the power of the producer and the power of the consumer in very unpredictable ways. This last image from April of 2021 is from the Singaporean-American electronics company Razer that issued a new campaign. This campaign went to emphasizing the pollution of the ocean and what society can do to help. The campaign, labeled as #GoGreenWithRazer, was called the Kanagawa Wave Collection. It is a limited edition collection of clothing and apparel made from recycled marine plastics. This image is comprised of Hokusai's original images, extensively modified. The image of the Great Wave is modified with another wave on the right side of the image cresting, as well as also having the boats removed and replaced with pieces of trash like bottles, gas cans, jars, and fast food packaging. This color scheme is also drastically different. Instead of the traditional blues, tans, and whites that many other artists use, the image is done in all black and the waves are detailed in green and white. The intentions behind this image have virtually no connection to the original meanings within the Great Wave. They simply utilize the image to create their own new ideas. Every article of this collection sold out within 2 days. When looking at this image, a viewer would have no inclination of where the image came from or the history of the image, since the only things tying it to its origins are the inclusion of Mount Fuji in the background and the name. However, to the general public, they may have no idea that Mount Fuji is the mountain that stands in the background, or that the original image is from Hokusai. The title is the greatest tie-in to Hokusai's work. All of these different images, along with the thousands of other replications and parodies, play a role in connecting the Great Wave to a capitalist nature of some kind. The assimilation of the Hokusai's motif leads to a commodification and commercialization of the image that allows for individuals to find their own meanings and readings behind the image. It evolves the intent of the image, adding layers upon layers to the meaning behind it, giving new readings and feelings. It has intertwined the world of art and commercialism to an extent that is unheard of, making it an incredible work of art on both an economic level and a social level. Katsushika Hokusai's Under the Wave off Kanagawa, or The Great Wave, has become a cultural icon and has become an incredibly important work and is instantly recognizable all over. These images previously discussed serve to uncover the mysteries of the Great Wave and the massive surge of its use as a motif for artists. The many iterations, parodies, and merchandise serve the growing social importance in the world of art and art history, as well as the importance of this image from an economic standpoint. They become contributions to the economy and capitalism, they pay homage to Hokusai and his works, and they add to the many possible interpretations of the Great Wave as a work of art. With the many new uses and iterations of this image emerging, scholars will continue to study it and finally answer the question of why this image has gripped the world so widely and intensely. Thank you.